Hey everyone, in this video, I'm going to be discussing ethics and group work. I'm going to be going over mostly the ACA Code of Ethics and some of the core meta-ethical principles. For those of you who are taking the class, that this video is also based on, the articles go into a little bit more depth on particular ethical considerations for group work. So I'm not going to emphasize that as much because it's already in the readings, but I'm going to discuss it a little bit here. I guess to start with, so those of you who are more familiar maybe with the individual counseling ethical frameworks, a lot of those still apply, especially for counselors. So for counselors, the ACA Code of Ethics, those codes still apply to group work. There's a few specific codes that are, particularly referencing group work, which I'll talk about later in the video. But for the most part, just for example, like competence, we need to make sure that we're competent in our work with clients. And a lot of times that means that initially, when working with groups or with individuals that we're not as familiar with, we need to be seeking supervision. We need to be actively under supervision. Everything applies about being culturally attuned, culturally respectful and multiculturally competent, or working towards that at least. So once again, I just wanted to make that note that those general codes still apply to group work, even if it's not necessarily saying for group counseling specifically. What I mostly wanted to talk about, though, is, and this may not provide exact direction of the particulars of what to do and what not to do, but it's more what are the core overarching principles that are the foundation of ethical practice. So I'm going to share my screen really quick and share a few thoughts on this. Okay, so this visual here, yeah, I just generic Word document visual here. So it might look similar to other things that you've seen before, but it's kind of messy. This document or this figure, when I first created it, I was like, okay, that looks kind of chaotic with all these overlapping circles. But that's kind of I guess, a visual representation of group work, or excuse me, not just group work, but ethics in group work as well as individual work. That there's these core principles of ethics that are always overlapping and sometimes competing. So ethical work isn't just a clear-cut practice or a clear-cut visual, a clear-cut process in general. So these six areas, they they're the they're the core meta-ethical principles. That's the foundation of the ACA Code of Ethics. So I'm just going to go through them really quick, just as a quick refresher. So obviously autonomy, we need to be encouraging the independent direction that the client wants to take. So that means we're not imposing our values or our perspectives of direction onto the clients. Like, we might be able to share thoughts and give feedback, but ultimately we respect the autonomy of the individual. Non-maleficence, that's obviously addressing that do no harm. That's the core idea there, that we're not going to do harm to clients. Beneficence is do good. Uh, then justice, fidelity, and veracity. So justice basically just relates to fairness, that we're going to treat clients fairly. Uh, and then fidelity is keeping promises, fulfilling the responsibilities that we've said that we would fulfill. Then veracity is being honest and truthful. Uh, so in the end, I guess the key reason why I want to talk about these core meta ethical principles is because sometimes when you get into an ethical dilemma, and there isn't one particular code that perfectly like tells you what to do to resolve that ethical situation, which, I guess, disclaimer, or just to let you know, that doesn't really exist. A lot of times that's why they're called ethical dilemmas and conundrums, because there's not a clear answer. But if we can usually like think back to, okay, but what are the core principles of the ACA Code of Ethics? What are these core ethical factors that we're really trying to live by? If we go back to that position, that can often kind of help us generate direction. Like, for sure, in my work, I want to at least bear like my core. To me, the baseline ethical principle here is non-maleficence, to do no harm. I want to make sure that I'm doing no harm. Then obviously a step beyond that would be, okay, then I'm starting to do good, moving towards beneficence. And then that, I think that kind of integrates in the autonomy, veracity, fidelity, and justice. So those are all part of doing good. Uh, but one kind of obvious example though is that sometimes these overlap. I guess the ideal is when like we can get towards the middle when there's as many overlapping principles as possible. Then we're like obviously moving towards ethical practice. But sometimes like autonomy and non-maleficence sometimes will conflict. So for example, if a client says, I'm going to kill myself, and so autonomy, if we were only living like from an autonomy based principle, we'd say, okay, that's your choice. But obviously, no, that's not what our the core of our profession believes in. That we also believe in this non-maleficence. We're going to do no harm. It would be a harmful thing to not intervene because the person is saying they're going to kill themselves. So now we can kind of see that this conflict between, okay, so we're going to choose non-maleficence over autonomy in that circumstance because we want to make sure that the person stays alive, which I'm obviously all for that. But you can start to see that in certain circumstances, we're choosing certain metaethical principles over others. So I just kind of want to pause there and not like necessarily provide clear answers because the particulars of the ethical situations and in group work as well, we're going to run into this where, okay, so I'm trying to respect the autonomy of the group and as well as like encourage beneficence, that I'm hoping to do some good and then create a good in their lives. uh how do I do that? So anyways, so these are the core principles to be wrestling with and thinking about. uh with that being said, there are a few core specific codes that are relating to group work. So A9 talks about group screening as well as protecting clients. Uh, and that's specific to in your group counselor role. So the screening is, checking to make sure that the group's actually a good fit and that it'll be appropriate for all the group members who are coming together. And obviously, that's not a perfect fit. We don't know for sure if they're going to be a good fit, but it's our best educated guess based on what we know of the clients and the information that we're gathering before we're making the invitation. uh, B4A also talks about group confidentiality, and the articles this week also talk about that. We can only control what we do as the group leaders and counselors. We can't control what the other members talk about. Like we can encourage group confidentiality, encourage being private about information, but a, a group member might go and talk about what another group member talked about, maybe even on social media, and it's public. So we can do our best to discourage that and regularly remind, but we can't control that. So that kind of leads to informed consent as well. That we need to make sure that that's clear in the informed consent process. So obviously, informed consent's a general ethical requirement for individual counseling, and group counseling, but the particulars are going to be a little different, obviously. So it needs to be pretty clear in the informed consent for group counseling for each member that they understand that group confidentiality, as one example. So some of the other, for those in my class, some of the other supplemental resources kind of go a little bit beyond and talk about some of the specifics of ethics in group work. But I really just in this video, and this to keep it brief, I wanted to mostly emphasize those meta ethical principles. So being and encouraging you to be thoughtful of, okay, so when I'm considering ethical cases in group work, how can I, when it gets difficult to know exactly what to do or not do, how can we think back to these core ethical principles? And when they conflict, we need to be aware of that. And we need to be aware of which values we're ultimately choosing, or ethical values we're ultimately choosing over others, and have a rationale for that, and usually documenting that very clearly. So anyways, those are just a few thoughts to get you thinking big picture, and then some of the readings kind of get into the nuances of responding to cases. So any questions or anything come up for you, feel free to reach out. Thanks.